What is it about music that can transform your ordinary life into something extraordinary? What is it about music that can touch us so deeply and set in motion the wheel of our emotions? Whether we celebrate each other, nature, or the divine, our desire to express ourselves through music is ancient and a cultural universal. In this program, we will explore music from all over the world and speak with guests from musical, spiritual, scientific, and other realms in a quest to share and understand how music affects us. I'm your host, BRAUN, and this is Soulscapes. Life is like a musical score we never fully see, and a weaving pattern we never fully know. We move through it the way a musician shapes a phrase, and a knitter builds a row. One breath, one stitch, one moment at a time. Music creates harmony by layering voices. Knitting creates fabric by interlocking loops. Life creates meaning by interweaving people, choices, and memories. Nothing stands alone. Everything is held by something else. Kirk Dunn is a fiber artist, writer, and actor known for the award-winning one-man show, The Knitting Pilgrim. As a fiber artist, he has designed many installations, both big and small, as well as garments and household decor items. Kirk has been a guest speaker for several knitting guilds and has given workshops at places like the Textile Museum of Canada, the Aga Khan Museum, and London's Southwark Cathedral in England. Lifting the art of knitting to new heights, one glorious loop at a time. Kirk Dunn, welcome to Soulscapes.
Thank you, Addie. It is a pleasure to be here.
If I say knitting, what do you say?
Maybe magic. I think knitting is this wonderful thing that anybody can do. Is accessible. It is not threatening, and it is something that will create beautiful, wearable works of art and things that are gorgeous not only to look at, but things that are functional and things that convey emotion and meaning and care and empathy. And I just think it's got so many different layers that that word magic, I think, encapsulates a bunch of them.
It certainly does. And we're going to talk more about, what knitting means to you, what knitting may mean to me, or the ideas that people have about what it all is. But let's just travel back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? And tell us about your background. I'm always interested in what, if any, kind of music or art was in a person's growing up experiences.
So I was a PK, a preacher's kid. I was the middle of three boys, and I grew up in North Bay, Ontario, primarily. Although my father did have a stint with the Presbyterian Church in Guyana for 3 years, so and that was a bit formative too. But and as far as music and art, I had always been interested in, I went to church. I was always in the church choir because I was a preacher's kid. I had to be in the church choir. And I really enjoyed that. And then I loved in public school, just performing and being in plays. And I did a lot of that in my high school career, a lot of the drama club, and ended up going into the theater as a result. So and music was a big part of that because I was in musicals, and I enjoyed music. I learned to play the trumpet in high school. I didn't, put enough effort into it to become, any good at it, really, but I liked it. And I've just always been surrounded by the arts and really had an appreciation and an affinity for them.
So how old were you? And I mean, that must have been an enormous cultural, visual, geographic, sensory change, explosion. Just tell us a little bit about that time.
Yeah, I was ages 4, 5, and 6. in Guyana. And you're a kid, so what do you know? Just whatever's in front of you, like that's what the world is. Okay. I have memories of being there. I remember running around with. I remember hating shoes. Couldn't stand wearing shoes, and running around in bare feet everywhere. And it was wickedly hot too. And I remember picking at the road repair, like they repair a road with tar. And of course, the tar would melt, and you'd pick at it with your toes and making little balls, and they kick these little balls around. I remember that. I remember fishing for guppies in the ditches of Georgetown, Guyana. And we lived right behind the zoo, and you could hear the lion roar every night, which was very strange, really. This is the '60s when they weren't treating animals very well, and there was a lion pacing in a cage just about 500 meters away from our house. And then I also remembered, about a year, 2 years after that, I was up in North Bay playing in snowbanks in a snowsuit. And I think back about that, there didn't seem to me to be anything unusual about that or discordant. It was like, well, that was then, and it was hot all the time, and now it's freezing, and I'm in a snowsuit in a snowbank, and that makes perfect sense. I'll just go on with it. So, kids are very, very adaptable, and I certainly was very much like that.
It tells me quite a bit about you as a kid, though. The fact that you were nonplussed by the experiences, maybe they were equally great. You played with the hot black tar in your toes, and next you have a white snowball, equally fascinated by that. So you must have been a very anchored, healthy child. I'm just assuming this. I'm not a psychologist, but it sounds like it.
Well, yeah, and I had a great upbringing. I had parents. My father, minister, Presbyterian minister. His theology was incredibly inclusive and incredibly open and kind and progressive and positive and loving. And so that was my experience of the church. And being in Guyana too, I was one of, I think, two white kids in my class.
Hmm.
And everybody else was either black or East Indian or Chinese. Yeah, there were a lot of people in the world, and they weren't all like me, and wasn't that fantastic? They
Mm.
were great people, and they had fabulous food, and I loved knowing
Hmm.
them, and they were good friends, and everything was good.
Those are such great memories. And moving along in your early childhood and then your young youth, you decided to become an actor. How did you embark on that journey? I know you already mentioned early on that you sang and you were interested in musicals and so, but when did you first sort of think this is kind of interesting and it expresses me well, or I express myself well?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, the very earliest memory I have of being on stage, ironically, was in Guyana.
Huh.
And there was a school production, and it was just a bunch of nursery rhymes, like kids getting up and doing these nursery rhymes. And the school too, it was in English. It's sort of based on the English system, so it was very strict. And I remember getting whacked by rulers when I didn't do the right things. And it was run by a bunch of Anglican nuns, and they were very cut and dry. But this was like a presentational thing of kids who were getting up and doing nursery rhymes. And my nursery rhyme was Simple Simon, met a pieman going to the fair. And all the other kids would get up and they sort of, waddle to the front and then mumble their things. And I got up and I remember this, and right front and center was the prime minister of Guyana at that time. His name was Forbes Burnham. And then he soon became the president. And then he decided, well, you know what? I think I'll be a dictator. And then he became the dictator. Anyway, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. Anyway, he was right in the front. And I walk up to the front, dun, 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 and I said, Simple Simon met a pieman going to the fair. And I just like belted this thing out. And everybody went, and they killed. And I remember watching Forbes Burnham killing himself laughing. Like he was just, I had no idea. Like, what's him laughing at? I'm just, just doing my thing. And I remember that I did, I think, a show. We did it with Oliver when I was in grade 8, and I played Fagin. And I just, I was happy to take risks and try new things and pretend. And do a lot of things that most kids were too self-conscious to try. And so I sort of that I think kind of stood out, and I turned out to be very good at it. And as I went through high school, I just got a lot of really good feedback from the performing that I did. And so I ended up going with that because it was something I really enjoyed, and I apparently had some affinity for, and I wanted to explore. Yeah.
So I'm imagining, you're busy, you're doing plays, writing, or whatever the case may be. You're an actor now. When did this knitting thing when did that bug bite you? Did it happen? I'm sort of imagining you've got a couple of, minutes in the wings when your character's not on stage. Did you knit in
Yeah.
your dressing room or something like that? Or how did that enter your life?
That is very much actually how it came into my life. And knitting
Woo.
came into my life directly through acting, and specifically what it was is my first job out of theater school. I got a job with the Ontario Women's Directorate, and this is when there was money. So this is like 880s when the government had money and they were sponsoring arts programs. They put money into a gender equity play during the summer, and we toured to public parks all around the province of Ontario. And we did a play called Girls Can, Boys Can. And the idea was that girls can do what boys can do, boys can do what girls can do. And so I played a 12-year-old boy, and my one of the actors who played opposite me, she played a 12-year-old girl. And our relationship in the play was very much, anything you can do, I can do. It was very competitive. So, like I would say, we were up in Northern Ontario, and like around Lake Nipigon, and I said, I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to go swimming in Lake Nipigon. And my friend Gina said, well, if you're going to go swimming at 6 o'clock, I can go swimming at 6 o'clock. And so, we did this together. And then I think a few days later, it might have been in Wawa, we walked into a trading post, and there were these beautiful sweaters for sale. And I thought, oh, that's gorgeous. I think I might buy one of these sweaters. And she looked at the sweater and said, buy the sweater. I could knit that sweater. And I thought, well, if you could knit a sweater, I could knit a sweater. So that's what we did. I got actually I had Gina give me a pattern for a sweater, an Icelandic sweater, and I basically taught myself how to knit. Well, I had some help from the nice ladies who sold me the yarn. I'd go back to them and say, "What am I doing wrong?" And they'd tell me, and I'd try it again. And then the other thing that happened, and so as I was knitting these sweaters, and I at the time I was dating another girl, and she had recently knit me a sweater, and so I figured the big surprise would be for me to knit her a sweater in return. So I did that. And then I also, at the same time, had a job as a security guard at a hospital where I worked the midnight shift on the weekends. So from midnight to 8 in the morning, I was, just sitting around with nothing to do. And so I got really good at knitting. And then you add to that your life as an actor, which is a lot of hurry up and wait. If you're on a film set, mostly you're just sitting on your duff waiting for them to set up the shot. You got to have something to do. And then also in theater, you're not necessarily called for every scene, or you're not on stage the whole time. So I'd be knitting. So I had so much time to knit, and I did it so often that I got pretty good at it. So that's where it all came from.
I love listening to you because I hear, and I'm imagining you as a growing man, I hear, joy, resilience, and confidence in no particular order. And that seems to have informed a lot of what you do. I tried a little bit of knitting when one is supposed to do that as some sort of craft at school. I grew up in Germany, and foolishly, perhaps like many people, always assumed that it was started by women for women, and it's a women's craft. I knew a few men who knit, so I did a little research and prep for our talk, and I was completely surprised to learn that knitting was primarily a male craft that dates back to the 12th century, with the establishments of knitting guild. As a man who knits, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly is ironic. It kind of makes sense in the patriarchy of Western society that the men would get a hold of something and think they had to own it. And I think at that time too, it was a way to make money. And a lot of rather skills and trades were things that people did, in their houses. So this idea of us going to a place to work, like a factory or an office, it's actually relatively new. It's not. It's only since the Industrial Revolution that we started that kind of thing. Usually, everybody else was just, usually you're working sort of downstairs in your house plying your craft or your trade, and so knitting was one of those things. And then to control it, of course, you had to have a guild, and you had to join the guild, and you'd be an apprentice, and all that
Right.
sort of stuff. But and then what happened? I think this is what happened, or this is going to be close to what happened anyway. So I'm going to say it with some degree of confidence. Is that when the Industrial Revolution started, the men went to the factories, and though some women did too, but other women were stayed at home, and they realized that they could knit at home and still make some money from that. And then eventually the knitting got the factories took over the knitting too. The machines took over the knitting, and that became harder and harder and harder to make money at. Some people still wanted to have hand knit pieces of clothing, but you really can't. I mean, if you were to get paid for the time you spent knitting something, it would just the price of a sweater would be astronomical, or whatever it is you're making. Knitting is now done as an act of love, really.
We often use words associated with knitting as metaphors in just day to day conversation, like weaving together words, or the threads of fabric of your life, or even this had me in stitches. What is it about this act of knitting that lends itself so well to becoming a symbol of life or a symbol of our actions?
Well, I think it is. I mean, it comes back to that some of what we talked about before, that magic of what it is. You take a string basically, and you can turn it into something you can wear, or you can turn it into a work of art, or a beautiful garment that you can give to a loved one, or that you can knit yourself and use as something to allow you to work, or to stay warm while you ply your trade. And and the idea that it happens, um, it's so simple. It's just a binary system. It's a knit stitch and a purl stitch, and you just add them together enough. They somehow, like miraculously and magically, create something that was not there before, and it is interwoven and integrally involved and linked. So it's a great I think allegory for life, about just doing one little thing a number of times suddenly turns into something that is much bigger. Again, that idea of the whole being more than the sum of its parts. I think knitting definitely qualifies for that.
In 2019, you strung together fabric and words in a most spectacular way when you unveiled your play and art, The Knitting Pilgrim. Tell us about the play and how it came about.
The show, The Knitting Pilgrim, it was, I did not foresee there being a show, The Knitting Pilgrim. It started with um, the art piece, which I called Stitched Glass. And the reason I did that was because I was trying to take my knitting to the next level. I become very good at knitting, and I knit a lot of sweaters. And then I found a certain knitter named Kaif Fassett, who was all about multiple colors in
Very
sweaters and
well
mixing
known, yeah.
colors. Yeah. And I loved his stuff. And I said, that's the kind of stuff I want to do. And I knit a bunch of his sweaters. And then I said, I want to try something. I want to do it myself. I want to make something like this. And so I started designing my own sweaters. And that was going very well. And then Claire, she met the head of the textile museum at that time, whose name was Natalie Nage, and she arranged for me to go by and talk to Natalie about my knitting and what to do with it. And she looked at my stuff and she said, "Wow, this is great, but it's just sweaters. Like, nobody really cares about sweaters. You need to do something bigger. You need to make an installation. You need to make art, like say something about the world, rather not just knit a sweater." And so I was a bit, I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't what was going on. And then, strangely, that I was in a production with the Toronto Concert. Actually, the Toronto Concert had hired me to work on their production of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and I played Sir
Mm,
Gawain. And it was done at Trinity St. Paul's Church here in Toronto.
sure.
And I was looking up at the stained glass windows of Trinity St. Paul's, and I just loved the colors of them because the stained glass is like such bright blues and deep reds and gorgeous golds and yellows and greens. They're just lovely. And then the light comes through them and they're translucent and oh, they're beautiful. I was thinking, I'd like to knit something, a stained glass window. But I didn't know what that was going to be. And then around that time, unfortunately, the 9/11 occurred. And this comes back to what I was talking about earlier. Having grown up in the church, in the Presbyterian church, and having had a good experience of it, and having in Guyana, I was friends with Muslim kids and Hindu kids, and well, people of all different religions, and didn't bother anybody. And I thought everything was fine. And some of my and I had some good Jewish friends too, and so I was really disappointed, and I guess I had questions about what was going on in the world with you had Islam and Christianity and Judaism, these three faiths that all came from the same place, from Abraham. They're all Abrahamic faiths, and they're all basically saying the same thing. And I just wondered why are they not getting along? Like, what's going on here? And so I applied to the Ontario Arts Council through the Chalmers Foundation to create this tapestry, or this triptych rather, of three tapestries, and each one was a full-sized, but looked like a stained glass window. So they were about 9 feet tall by 5.5 feet wide. And they looked at the commonalities and the conflicts between the three Abrahamic faiths. So there was one panel that was about Judaism, and one was about Christianity, and one was about Islam. And they included images of all the other faiths, of those other two faiths, and how they related to that particular faith that I was speaking of. And I applied to the Arts Council for this, and they gave me a lovely grant. I was shocked and appalled that they gave me $45,000. So it was a huge hit. And then I had to actually make the thing. And I told them it's going to take me about 10 months. That's what I said in the application. And it ended up taking me about 15 years. And the problem with that, or there were a number of problems with that, but one of the biggest challenges was at the end of 15 years, all I had was this one project, and that had taken me 15 years to finish. And so when I went to various textile museums or galleries and said, I'd like to, are you interested in displaying this? They looked at me and said, who are you?
Mm.
Because you don't have any name as an artist. You don't have any portfolio. You haven't got a record of exhibitions. You have no standing, or and basically they basically said, your art is worthless. Like, we can't do anything with this. And that was pretty disappointing. And then, Clara and I, we had a good friend, Tracy Aaron Smith, who is a theater creator, and she suggested, well, why not just, Kirk, you're an actor. Why not write a one-man show and make the tapestry your set? And so that's what we did. Claire loved that idea, and so we wrote this show, and it was mostly Claire who was the impetus behind that, because I was so depressed and annoyed that I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to stick it in a box somewhere and forget about it. But no, we wrote this show, and we put it on, and despite my terror of actually performing it, because I had no confidence that anybody would be interested in it, because for me it was like 15 years of my failure not getting the thing done.
Hmm.
And it was my story, and it was about me, and I didn't think anybody would care. But then, ironically, the exact opposite was true, and it has been a huge hit, and people have seen themselves mirrored in
Hmm.
this experience, and for most people, it's not, it's not about me and my tapestries so much. It's about them and whatever it is that's going on in their lives. They
Hmm.
can follow my path and my struggle. They can map the same thing in their lives.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't give up because, a good thing takes a long time. And it's a good thing that you had a Claire in your life who believed in
Mhm.
you. As you mentioned before, when you were smitten by the stained glass, that you said it was Trinity St. Paul's when you first had that, sort of idea. Stained glass, of course, has the advantage and the miracle and the magic of being translucent and letting the light illuminate colors. Wool, however, is opaque. Yet, in looking at your three panels, even though it's just on YouTube for me, I hope to see it live soon. I feel as if they are very translucent. So, how did you achieve this?
Yeah, that is just the way I like to work with color, and that's about I guess the art of it. I like using multiple strands of color at once. So where most people would just say, "Well, I'll take that red yarn and I'll knit a red sweater with it, and you'll get a red sweater." I'm interested in using different. So if I have to knit something that's red, I will use three or four strands of color, and one of them might be like say a scarlet red, and one of them might be a like a deep crimson, and maybe you might even
Mm.
make it like brown or something, and then there would be a pink in there, and then maybe a purple. And what happens is when you're using those four strands together, as you knit with them, they twist, and those different hues come and go, and it's kind of like
So,
of
it's almost
making.
three-dimensional in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, a bit like that, but it's also kind of like the pointillists who painted. Like, because when you're mixing paint, if you want to mix green paint, everyone knows how to do that. You take some blue paint and some yellow paint, and you mix them together, and they disappear, and you get your green. Well, with the yarn, it's you do use the blue paint or the blue yarn and the yellow yarn and use it together, and they don't disappear. It becomes green, but the blue and the yellow stay at the same time. So, this is what Georges Seurat did with Sunday in the or the Sunday the Grand Chat
Yeah.
with those little dots of primary colors. And there were enough of them. When you stand back, it looks like they've mixed into another color. But when you get right up close, like, oh no, there's the yellow, there's the blue. Then look, now it's green. So it's a similar kind of thing to that. And the other thing I like to that happens when one does that is that I have some control over the colors I choose, but the yarns themselves they twist and they come in and out, and they move around of their own accord, because in all of my sections, if there's a red section, well, if you look closely enough, you'll actually see a little bit of green in there, and that gives it some depth and some and some that glowing sort of
Mm.
thing that you see in these pieces that are actually completely opaque, and yet they look like there is light coming through them. So.
So at the end of the storyline, were you as the one man actor? Is it like a sort of a discussion about the three faiths and why are we so at odds when there are so many commonalities? Do I sort of have it right?
Yeah, and it's a show about questions. It's about uh, sitting in the questions and asking questions and not being so rushed to get to the answers. And I think that's
Hmm.
um, a big problem with us in our Western society, in our post-Enlightenment brains. We like to have answers, and it's got to be black or white. And the
And right
truth
away,
is,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the truth is, nothing is black and white. It's all shades of color. And there are so many paradoxes in life. Most of the time, everything everything's existing all at once. So the things you say, well, that doesn't, those things are mutually exclusive. Maybe, but they're still there at the same time, both perfectly valid at the same time. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be one thing or the other. It can be both. We can enjoy that. We can embrace it. We can honor it. And my understanding and my belief is that we're all in this together. Like we are all part of one another. We are all knitted together. We are linked.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how far away you go on this world. There's a link there between us. It may be tenuous, it might be, very distant, but it is there. And we ignore that at our peril, at our personal peril and at the peril of our humanity.
The Knitting Pilgrim is not your only play featuring knitting. Spycraft is a play you co-authored with the aforementioned wife, Claire Dunn, and we love you for believing in your husband when he didn't believe in himself. Spycraft tells the story of a woman in the resistance during World War II who knits code into everyday garments. So in this way, knitting becomes a form of communication. In fact, vital communication, as socks, scarves, and mittens transmit messages. Tell us more about this play, how it came about.
This actually came out of the research we did for the Knitting Pilgrim. We heard that there were in one of the world wars there were women who knit code into socks while they spied on Nazi troop movements for the Belgian resistance. And we thought that's a great idea. There's got to be a great story in there. And it wasn't until years later, actually, not until COVID, that we had time to pursue this because we had some time on our hands. And so we came up with this idea that there would be a woman who actually did that, and wouldn't it be great if she could come in completely under the radar? So she was an older woman, so a woman in her 50s, which makes her invisible because, well, one, she's a woman, and two, she's in her 50s, so no one's paying any attention to her. So she could just sit there and listen in, or eavesdrop on situations, or she could go places and no one would think anything of her. And she could be just sitting there knitting, and no one would think she's doing anything interesting. But in fact, what could actually be doing with the knitting is capturing, data and code, because knitting is a binary system. It's just it's kind of like a computer is all done with the zeros and ones. That's how you program a computer on a binary system. Yeah. Well, you could, why couldn't you do the same thing with knitting? So that was the idea. And then in order to give her even more jeopardy, because we're thinking of doing this in the Second World War, we made our character a hidden Jew, and we put her into occupied France. So she started out in England, and she was trained there by the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, Winston Churchill's army of the secret army, I guess they called it, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. And we had her inserted in behind enemy lines in occupied France, and there she uses her knitting to insert her way into actually teaching a general's wife how to knit, and uses that relationship to spy on a Nazi general and to get information back to the UK.
Why is it, do you think, that in our world we sort of deem one thing to be very practical and it has nothing to do with art, right? So it may be frowned upon by some, but admired by others because, hey, you're doing something really useful and you're making garments and it can be worn. It has personal use. Why do we live in a world where we do not view art as being something that has personal use? And so along comes someone like you, who is sort of at the threshold where the practicality and the magic and the high art, low art, the lines become a little bit more blurred and everything becomes accessible. Is this something that is very much at the center of your mission, your what drives you?
Yeah, very much. And this is something I remember puzzling about when I was a kid. Because as a kid, I was interested in everything. I liked science. I liked art. And I remember reading the work of Ray Bradbury, The Martian Chronicles. And he talked about there was a Martian, it was science fiction, and the idea was they went to Mars and they found a Martian society, and they had blended art and science. And I thought, oh, now that's what I would like to do. That's what I think is doable. And so this whole idea of, as I've grown older, I've also, noticed that I'm really interested in paradoxes, these things that, are not supposed to be existing at the same time, and yet it so often do. I love a good paradox. And again, that's the same kind of idea. So something, I don't think very few things are just one thing. There are layers to things, and that's what makes them interesting, and that's what makes them worthwhile, and that's what gives them value beyond monetary value. I think we are, as a society, are hung up on monetary value.
When it gets right down to it, if you think about, making socks is a little bit mundane. If you change your thinking and think that, believe that man, woman, humans are works of art, you are making something to clothe a work of art. So therefore it is art. So it is all just one gloriously knit together experience. Um, I'm curious, do you listen to music while you knit?
I do. Yes, and actually, and I'd mentioned that I did a job for the Toronto Concert, and I love listening to their stuff. And I, after I worked with them, I just went to their table at the front of the theater, and I just bought all their CDs. I'll take that one and that one and that one and that one. I particularly like their Christmas music too, because it's familiar, and yet it's also, it's different, and it's like it's foundational. One of my favorite songs that I listen to every year around Christmas time when I'm doing my Christmas knitting is "Lo, how a Rose Are Blooming."
Mm.
Uh,
Es ist ein Ros
yes,
entsprungen, the original
yes,
German, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I also really I just love the sound of the human voice, and a cappella groups are fantastic. And there's a group that I found recently, they're called Windborn, I think.
Mm.
And it's two men and two women, and they sing, they do some uh religious music, but they do a lot of protest songs. So songs they have some called like the songs of the lower classes, and um, the Chartists anthem, and things like "Which Side Are You On?" So things that have a real message. And so, I mean, again, that's one of the things I like about that music, is it's working on a number of levels. There is a true message to it, and it just sounds beautiful, and it's inspiring. And so those are some of the things I listen to.
Just because you mentioned some of the music that you listen to while you're knitting, if you had to choose a few pieces of music that you go to for upliftment, what would Kirk Dunn's mini playlist look like?
Hmm. I have a favorite. I mean, and it is and I think I heard it in high school before I knew that it was popular. And I think we actually would do it in a round too. And that's Pachelbel's Canon, which I know is everybody knows and is kind of overdone. But that is a favorite. It's something that makes me just feel good, and like it's a real reset. And yes, and then that the Christmas music as well. As I mentioned, I just love the "Lo, how a Rose Are Blooming," and I won't attempt the German, so I sorry about that.
If knitting carries a message with a meaning, and obviously it does for you, how do you see it playing a role in our future?
And just in the future, I think in the future of humanity, I think it is a craft that is deceptively simple, easy, so it's accessible. Anybody can do it.
Mhm.
I think it is disarmingly non-threatening. It doesn't, we associate it with our grandmothers. We associate it with softness and warmth and comfort.
Hmm.
Um, and it's something that it's a great medium for what they call craftivism, which is activism using craft. And so you can kind of come in under the radar with knitting, and you can have something that can be wonderfully subversive, and nobody even realizes it's there, or it takes people a while to figure it out, and by that time they're disarmed by it, or they don't, it gets past their defenses. It allows us to open up avenues of conversation, and allows us to say and do and feel and things, and make connections that ordinarily we would not be able to make because people are too suspicious.
Well, I think, and I have not seen nearly enough of your art, but there's a very clear code that is woven into all of your pieces, and that is love, for sure.
Thank you.
What's coming up for you in terms of any new things you're working on? And also for those of us who have not been able to see either the Knitting Pilgrim or Spycraft, will they be mounted at some point, even in Ontario?
Spycraft, we hope so. I mean, we basically produced it ourselves in order to get it out there so that other theater companies who actually have the resources to do that kind of thing could see it and then pick it up themselves. But the theater seasons have very long lead times, like years and years and years. So any production of Spycraft is probably going to be a couple of years in the future. Now, the Knitting Pilgrim continues to tour, and actually just today booked a show in Goderich, of all places.
Oh, great.
Goderich. Right? So it's on October the 16th. It will be at St. George's Cathedral on the 16th, Friday the 16th of October. And so that's happening, and I continue to try to change. I will tour it anywhere and everywhere. And so I'm revisiting some of the churches I've been to earlier, and some of the theaters I've worked with before.
I'm curious. So when you say churches, I'm assuming that you mean of Christian origin. Have you ever approached any of the other sacred venues? Have you spoken to an imam or a rabbis about putting it on there in a synagogue or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we have performed at a number of synagogues as well. Yeah, a few in Toronto, and we've been to Temple Israel in Ottawa twice. So yes, and we did have a show lined up at an Islamic community center just before COVID, and then COVID. We lost that. So that was too bad. But yes, we are working with all those places of faith, really. You're right, not just churches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Kirk, it's been such an honor for me to finally have this chat. And I hear love, enthusiasm, respect for your craft, respect for people. Everybody should be checking out Kirk Dunn. Your website is kirkdunn.com. Simple as that? Or that's it?
That's simple.
Kirk, thank you so much for being my guest on Soulscapes.
Addie, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
I had asked Kirk if he would read a section from his play, The Knitting Pilgrim. Here he is, in a pivotal moment in his life.
Kay Fassett is coming to Toronto for a stitchery festival. My wife Claire says, well, why don't you meet him? Show him your designs. Nah, I'm not so sure. Claire says, what are you afraid of? So I summon my courage, I meet Kaif, and I show him my knitting. And he's impressed. And I think that's the end of it. But Claire has other ideas. A word about Claire. She is the love of my life. And before we were married, the minister gave us a personality indicator test. Turns out we're very similar, except for one thing. Claire likes to get stuff done, move forward. I like to stay where I am, keep my options open. The minister says, this one difference has the potential for conflict. So Claire says, why don't you ask Kaif if you can apprentice with him at his studio in London? Oh, no, she's pregnant with our first child, so I can ask now, or not at all. I swallow my fear and I float the idea, and Kaif says yes. I apprentice
for a month at the Café Fassett studio in London, England. Café is wildly productive. He is fearless. Nothing gets in his way, and I come home inspired, and for the first time since acting, I think, now this is an art form I could do full time. 3 months later, Claire gives birth to our first child, Finley. Now, I'm a busy dad. I am juggling auditions, changing diapers, and doing a part-time job. And then 2 years after that, our son Emmett comes along, and my life just explodes. And even though there is less and less time to do it, it is the knitting that keeps me sane. And then, one day, Claire comes home from a function where she's met the head of the Textile Museum of Canada, Nathalie Nage, and she has told Nathalie that I am going to go to the Textile Museum and show her my knitting. Well, I'm not doing that. When I get to the Textile Museum, I show Nathalie some of the sweaters I've knit. Nathalie says, these are Café Fassett designs. Where are yours? Oh, right. Yes, well, I show her my designs, and she likes my use of color. Tell me about that, she says. Oh, okay. Well, I like to mix colors with multiple strands of yarn, which I choose as I knit on the fly, like improv. With painting, if you take blue paint and yellow paint and mix them together, they disappear and they become green paint. Well, with the yarn, the blue and the yellow stay, and you still get the green. It's like the pointillists, who painted with little dots of primary colors. And they also believed that every color's shadow should incorporate some of its complementary colors. So in my blue sections here, I work in some little orange dots every now and then to really make those blues pop. And the yarns twist, and little specks of color are revealed. It's like Impressionism on the needle. Nathalie says to me, Kirk, nobody cares about sweaters. You're an artist. You should be doing installations. Say something about the world. Make art. Well, I'm an actor. I make art all the time. Like that beer commercial I just shot. Oh. I go somewhere where I can think about what Nathalie has said. I go to church.
From north to south and east to west, music inhabits every corner of our world and beyond. I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with actor and fiber artist Kirk Dunn. I'm Audie BRAUN, and this is Soulscapes.